I think that is a good point with this movie. And if somebody hasn't seen it, that would be one reason to see it. The way it does explore, what does it mean to take care of your family members and your community, yourself, and the anxiety around money. Even though this is a movie from 1933, they're talking about the same things people talk about today. So, to me, that's one of the main, reasons of to look at this movie. Welcome back, everybody, to the Family Movie Time podcast. I have two special guests today, Joe and Aaron. Aaron and Joe, thank you very much for being on this episode. We're going to talk about Wild Boys of the Road. This is a movie from 1933. It's directed by William Wellman. I'll say a little bit about the film. I showed this movie at a public library several years ago for a mini retrospective on the director William Wellman. Wellman made films starting in the silent movie era into the sound era. And this film is from the pre-code era of film. And it's a movie that is under 90 minutes. It's only about 65, 67 minutes. So if you do get a chance to see it, you know a little bit what to expect. It is in black and white. We watched this film together, so we had kind of our own private screening of this film. And I want to start with you, Joe, because you saw this film for the first time when we watched it together. I want to get your notes first.
First of all, I was surprised with what they got away with in the 30s. I was shocked within the first 5 minutes. I was like, whoa, I did not expect this. Not that I would consider it gratuitously racy by any means, but, what's ironic is there were times after this that I don't think they would have let some of that slide in a movie. So it's ironic that it came in times before. Within the first minute, there was 2 unsolicited spankings. I was just like, wow, under 30 seconds, and 2 adults got a hand on the butt. But that happened. Then within the first 2 minutes, there was like a making out in the back of a car scene, and it implied that there might have been more. Just kind of like, again, not offended, and by today's standards, pretty tame. I mean, we see stuff like that on TV any night you turn on the television nowadays. But, ironically, growing up in like the late 70s, early 80s, there was things in this movie that you wouldn't have seen on TV. So I was just like, that was my biggest surprise, coming into this with no expectations, not knowing anything about the film. What I found shocking too, and this is just in like modern day standards or just from a male perspective. So there is the making out scene in the beginning, and then the guy complains that the girl wants to kiss too much. Since when does the guy complain? I'm sorry, were any of you like, what is wrong with him? Like, this guy is like, he's got a girl laying on top of him in the backseat of a car, and he's complaining. I don't know if they like.
I think it was to mess with your expectation, and that's part of the comedy. It was for laughs.
Okay,
that's my take.
I found it more depressing.
What's your take on that, Aaron?
On the choice to have.
Do you think it was just for laughs, or other reasons for that particular scene, the making out in the back seat?
Well, I think because it occurs at the head of the film, right? It's in the opening, and it adds a little bit to the kind of pre-code, kind of like sauciness of it. But it is also funny. It makes it kind of light, kind of fun. In some ways, it starts sort of a certain elevation for the trajectory in which the film, proceeds.
By the way, you just, mentioned pre-code. Jeff, you mentioned pre-code at the beginning. Do your listeners know what you're talking about?
There was the silent film era, and when you had the talkie pictures, there was a lot of freedom for filmmakers. It was new. There weren't a lot of rules. In the early 30s, they started to get, like from 29 to 30, the film started to get edgier, as you were saying earlier, Joe. And they were trying to include heavier topics and a lot of, racy, saucy, maybe scandalous, provocative types of things. And so there's a period in film history, it's about 3 or 4 years, known as the pre-code era. And those movies were the ones that really were the reason why the rating system started to become a thing and enforced in 34 is when they were like, okay, these are the rules. We're going to watch the movie now, and then we're going to have to like approve it before it's released. So it's a very interesting period in film history and very much known for edgy movies that are pretty, like, I would say still socially relevant, a lot of them. And, you know, a lot of serious topics about life and society and economics and, you know, romantic love, family, so many like, you know, things that people I think could relate to. So if nobody's ever seen a pre-code movie, I suggest at least look up the comedies. Start with some comedies, and then if you like those, maybe see some of the more dramatic titles.
You really felt, or maybe the audience wasn't aware of that, but there were strictures that were placed pretty heavily on. Couldn't use certain language, couldn't have certain kind of imagery, couldn't make suggestions of certain things. And that existed for, I think, about 30 years, until the 60s or so when that started to break up. But during that code period, the Hayes office really was almost like they came down very hard on films. You had to get approval. If your film didn't have the approval of the code, the Hayes office, you know, production code, then you wouldn't get a release stamp. And then, you know, they wouldn't let you release your film. Some people tried to circumvent it, and some people, well, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, so like you compare films from that pre-code period to like even like just a couple years later, stark difference in like similar subject matter. Yeah, hugely different.
Well, you wouldn't have seen the girl laying on the guy.
Absolutely not.
That was,
no way.
You know, I was shocked by that.
No way.
I was just like, oh wow. I mean, I joked about it earlier, but in all seriousness, that would have never flown.
No.
I mean, how many years did it take before they were able to show a husband and wife laying in the same bed again? You know, in TV history.
60s.
That's what I'm saying.
Up to the 50s still was 2 separate beds on television or cinema. Yeah.
It took over 30 years for them to catch up to what they were doing in the 30 pre-code. So it's a fascinating topic. All right. What was the name of the main character? Like the actor's name? Do you remember?
You're talking about Eddie.
Eddie, yeah.
The character's name? No, the actor's name.
The actor's name. What was his name?
The actor's name was Frankie Darro, I think.
Okay, Frankie Darro. I thought he was great. Squirrely little guy. Kind of reminded me of Tom Holland, honestly. Even looked like him a little bit. It was like, wow, okay. That was the 1930s Tom Holland, so that was something.
I feel like I mean, it's also kind of a portrayal, but I've seen Frankie Darro in some other pictures before, and he has much more of like an irreverence.
Okay.
You know, Tom Holland, I'm not that familiar with him, but he sort of has that kind of like nice guy around the corner vibe.
He does.
And this character in the Frankie Darro's character in Wild Boys, Eddie is much more of, I think, like a Wellman archetype.
Feels kind of like James Cagney sometimes.
So I was about to say, I'm pretty sure that this character is, you know, drawing from a particular type of either from the period, or because there's other Wellman titles where you get this kind of similar sort of character who's both tough, you know, willing to like put forward what he needs to, put a punch in, but he's also incredibly sensitive, incredibly like heartfelt, and really tuned in to like what's the well-being of my friend, my family, my community. Like this is something that's like particularly interesting in this film, but also something that you see in other Wellman films as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting you bring this up. I was going to talk about this later, but you kind of started hitting on it.
Yeah.
When you mentioned on like the tough guy, but then you touched on the heartfelt guy, right? Mm-hmm. And I found that really at odds in this film in a fascinating way. You know, this is made in a time before we had terms like toxic masculinity. But you see in this film all these moments of where toxic masculinity comes from. All the men greet each other or say goodbye with some form of punch. A fake punch to the chin. Him and his dad hitting each other in the kitchen. Like throughout the whole show, like there's always a punch. And there's always this tough guy thing. And then there's even this moment where he gives his friend permission to cry. And I'm jumping ahead near the end. But I mean, the kid's leg was amputated. And he's getting surgery in the middle of a train yard. And he has to give him permission to cry. Because it's like, real men don't cry, you see? We don't do that here. But I mean, that is all. Everything I just described is like, that defines toxic masculinity. Like, we know now, like, what a horrible way men were raised to think and be. We're like, you know, everything needs to have a touch of violence and bravado. And that's sad. So, like, there was that one half of Eddie that had that, but then there was this other half that was all heart, that did cry empathetically on behalf of his friend while he was getting surgery.
Or even when he was selling his car in the junkyard, and the junkyard owner guy said, we're going to be taking it apart piece by piece. And then Eddie, you could tell he started to cry and get emotional and really have a moment.
So, you know, whether it was intentional or not by the director or the writer, I just found the juxtaposition between this way a man was supposed to be and the heart that Eddie had, they were really at odds with one another. And it made for a complex character that put a smile on my face. Because at first, with all the punching and the jocular behavior, I was just like, it's really sad that this is what a man was supposed to be. But then I feel like Eddie kept breaking the mold and showing what a man is versus what a man's supposed to be. And I thought that was a really cool part of the story.
I think that's by design. I
agree completely.
Yeah, I think that's by design that they're...
part of his arc.
It's part of his arc, but because, you know, a lot of the film is very much kind of a screed, and also like a plea and a call, you know, to pay attention to what's happening today. I mean, this film is a Warner Brothers picture that's very much similar to many others that were made at the time, where they say it was the subject or the story was ripped from the headlines, which is true. This is true. There's tons of other films that were also drawn directly from newspapers, articles that were like of, you know, similar situations, and they were dramatized. So Eddie's character, I think, is very much a kind of attempt, maybe, to try to rectify some of the public display of what it is to be. I mean, because really, what you have here is you have a transition from carefree. The film opens, it's carefree, it's lively, it's jocular, into really kind of like catapulted into adulthood.
Yeah.
And in some ways, there's kind of an embrace of that.
Yeah.
They recognize that, like, circumstances are dire, and they kind of like take it upon themselves to say, okay, you know what? The times are tough, and like there's no one to fall back on. Like, we need to do what we need to do to help our family, our community, ourselves. And that, to me, is super fascinating. But it's kind of like distilled in the portrayal of this. But really, Eddie is like he's kind of the main character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
He has his crew, too.
You're right, exactly. Yeah. He has, I have to just say one thing. He has such an emotive face, this guy. I've seen him in a couple of other films from the period, but he is like so well cast. Incredibly well cast.
He nailed the role.
Yeah.
And very agile, he was running and jumps in a trash can in an alleyway in one scene, and then later on in the movie he's doing backflips and flipping forward and spinning on his head.
The acrobatics are so like visceral, and like there's no safety. Well, I'm sure there was some safety protocols, but you could tell that there was just like, okay, give us like one head spin, you know.
I think he did his own stunts, probably jumping off the train and jumping onto the trains.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I just couldn't help to think of this character that Eddie was. Like, at some point, that Jack Kerouac watched this movie and was like, I want to grow up and be that kid. That was one...
I was thinking about that. There's these romanticizations of the road, or roughing it, and this kind of, romance around it, or it's more of a fantasy, really. And I think this movie kind of gives you the reality of it.
Yeah, it was kind of like Jack Kerouac meets Grapes of Wrath.
Good point.
Yeah.
You know what this reminded me of? Actually, I was thinking about it the other day. I might have mentioned it to you, Jeff. Are you guys familiar with a short novel by Jack London titled "The Road"? Have you heard of this?
I don't think I've read that.
Heard of this?
I don't think I heard of it either.
It's probably not one of his well-known ones. It's a series of vignettes it's all about London's basically hoboing across the country, mostly on freight cars.
Oh, wow.
And because he was a journalist originally, so he has that kind of journalistic kind of view. Spending time in like tent cities. What's the process of trying to get a job? When you have very little. Getting handouts from people, moments of hospitality, both from amongst that hobo community, and also just citizens who have just like heartfelt acts of kindness. It's an interesting comparison because that book was written and set in the 1890s.
Oh, wow!
When there was also a similar kind of wasn't the Great Depression, but there was a kind of a financial hardship that was happening. It really reminded me of that. Of like almost you could see there could have been an inspiration potentially there.
Wow.
I just appreciated there was a scene where the dad goes to the unemployment office, and you just see the sign, and you see feet walk past it going in, and feet walk past it going out, and that's the whole transition that dad went to the unemployment office. I love the simplicity of that. I'm sorry, you're looking.
No. I'm agreeing. Yeah.
I want to see what you had to say.
No.
Because I wish movies today could be that simple. Like, I feel like movies are now made like, okay, the viewer is very stupid. We need to spell this out. We need to show them exactly what happened. Have someone narrate what they're seeing, and then tell them 2 more times so they understand. I love it. It's like, that was the story. He walked in, he walked out, he didn't get a job. Like, I got it. It took less than 10 seconds, and I got it.
Yeah.
I long for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go... I sort of feel like there was to much greater effect, more sort of like strictures placed on filmmaking back during that period than there are today. And a lot of that has to do with the technology, the access to technology, maybe the expectation around certain things. Films today run on average much longer than they did 50, let alone 100 years ago on average.
This is a movie that's like just under 70 minutes. Wild Boys of the Road.
Yeah, but you also have to remember this is a B picture.
True.
It didn't get A-list space or A-list resources. So this had to be industrious and, resourceful in its use of screen time, its use of personnel, its use of transitions. And I think because of that made for like, okay, how do we tell this visually? Get from A to B, be expedient, but instructive, and telegraphs exactly what we need to know in order to get to the next scene.
How about the role of music in Wild Boys of the Road? Is there anything that struck you about the music? Or lack of music?
The content is so compelling. It really is. There's like, I don't feel like in its entire screen time there was really a lull for me. Now, I am biased, and I've seen this film a number of times, so I kind of know it pretty well. But I feel like every scene is kind of propulsive. You're engaged. The stakes are present, and I don't feel like there was really much music at all that was used as a crutch. I mean, it was very spare. I felt like you had music in the opening, music in the closing. There was a quick montage of like the flashing headlines that came across with them moving, to the next Hooverville or the next town to find what they needed to find. But like the music was used, I felt like very economically and only where it needed to be.
I loved how quiet the movie is, especially when Eddie's talking to his parents early in the film. And I feel like after that conversation with his parents, the movie kind of slows down a little bit, and you get these reflective moments where he's just kind of walking around the house. He gets some of the pie. He's just kind of like taking his time. You can tell he's trying to make up his mind. And then the next scene, he's in the backyard looking at the garage to get his car and preparing to sell it at the junkyard. And no music during that scene. He just kind of looks, at first, like, you're not really sure, like, what is he looking at? The garage? Like, what's, is he getting ready to go, play the harmonica or something, panhandle? But he's getting his car ready, but he just kind of looks at the garage, and the movie, I think, gives the viewer also time to kind of reflect. And it's after the opening of the film, which is more boisterous and carefree, and they're just kind of like being reckless and hanging out. So you get to see him go through, I think, that kind of process of deciding to leave home too. And that's also, you realize what he was thinking about after that conversation with his parents. And I just love how throughout the rest of the movie, music never does interrupt or feel manipulative.
This movie was done well, and it didn't need that. It kept you in the moment. You used that word expediency.
Yeah.
It was expedient. And what's interesting is I don't feel like, I just saw a 1 hour movie. It felt like the same. I got everything I get out of a 2 hour movie in a 1 hour movie. It was expedient. But you know what's beautiful is I watch movies today and I want to pull out my phone throughout the movie because I'm kind of bored. Because it's like filler and over explanation and filler. This was like I was in the moment from beginning to end. I didn't want to pull out my phone. I didn't want to look over to one of you guys and talk about it. I was in. Yeah, I was dialed in.
It's so you're so engaged, and that's what I'm saying. They make such great use of that short running time. 68 minutes or something like that. I mean, like there's no moment wasted. Every moment is like forwarding the story, and you're with the characters the entire time. Whatever that emotional roller coaster they're on, whatever the events are, it's like you never felt like there was a lull, like there was filler. Everything felt so relevant and so well hewn. It's incredibly engaging and so relevant. Oh my God, so relevant for what's with the present era that we live in.
Aside from the cinema of the movie, the fact that it takes place during the Great Depression and it follows people who are struggling economically and who have to make decisions based on their condition, circumstance, with Eddie and his friend, and then winds up meeting more friends on the road. They're looking for work, essentially to send money back to their parents. If anybody hasn't seen the film, that's kind of
that's what the film's about.
The main premise is they hit the road to send money back to their parents because their parents are out of work and struggling. So it looked like later on in the movie they kind of almost had these makeshift kind of shacks where they pieced together wood and made these, like do-it-yourself kind of little shacks or cabins, hovels. Yeah. Aaron, what do you think is the funniest moment in the film for you? Like,
the entire film?
What gives you the biggest laughs?
Trains pulling into a yard, kids are being pulled off by, the railroad dicks, and they're trying to they're kind of sorting them. what are you doing here? What's your situation? You go over in that pen. Okay, you got a reason. Okay, you go there. All right, you're going to juvie, whatever it is. Then you got the two kids, and one of them who's opportunistic says to the guy standing next to him, he's like, I hear they let you go if you can produce like a note that says someone's waiting for you or something. And the second kid's like, I don't have a note. Well, the first kid's like, well, I've got a note and I'll sell it to you. Have you got a nickel? And he's like, sure, I got a nickel. I'll be like, great. He's like, rubbing his hands. Oh boy, I can't wait. They got the nickel. He hands them the note. Well, the railroad dick comes up. He's like, okay, what's your situation? He's like, I've got a note from my father. So the railroad dick opens up the note. The thing is written in Yiddish, handwritten in Yiddish. He turns it upside down, trying to figure out what's upright. And of course, he doesn't know what that says. It's a chicken scratch to him. And of course, the guy who paid for it, he now realized that kind of got duped in a way. And the kid who made out with the nickel, he's like, oh boy, this is fantastic. But like that's like, it's just like a great kind of moment. Not only like it gives it sort of like some cultural kind of like specificity. It anchors it for the period. It's also a moment of lightheartedness, which we really don't. There are them, but there's. The film has much heavier tone. It's much. There's a lot more sort of like higher stakes for these characters than there are lighter stakes, and I think this is one of those moments that's placed very well. That it's strategically placed to break that up a little bit. So that's one that I really appreciate quite a lot.
And I'll tell you my funny one in a second, but just to kind of go back, because again, we haven't described the full depth of what this film is to the listeners.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, Jeff touched on the fact it's these kids that leave home and they live a hobo lifestyle as they go out to find work to send home. But I mean, in the midst of this, there's implied rape, there's a murder, there's an amputation on the train tracks. Like, it's heavy, and it gets about as dark as you can get when you think about it. Especially because these things are happening to minors. So it is dark. It's heavy. It's weighty. So it was nice having those moments to breathe. The Yiddish letter was a moment to breathe. Yeah. The one for me, and it's mildly sophomoric, but I just thought it was so funny. There's the scene at the homeless encampment where one of the girls is doing laundry for the other homeless people, and you could pay her with food, which that alone I found kind of funny. So she had this sign with prices, like pants.
It's like a barter system almost that was like specific to that community.
Yes.
Like they had their own system of financial, kind of means and ways or something in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, she's got this boiling tub of water that she's washing clothes in, and she pulls out these long underwear, and there's all these holes in them. And she makes a disturbed face for a second, but then she smiles and, like, with pure joy says, now there's a guy who can really sit. That cracked me up. It was just like, out of all the things she could say, there's a guy who can really sit. It's like, that's awesome. Yeah. I've never sat that hard in my life. That to me was pretty great. Yeah. How about you, Jeff? What was your funny part?
I love the scene where the gal on the road,
Sally.
Yeah. And Sally says they finally, get to where they need to go. I think it's Chicago.
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, we could stay with my aunt." And then Eddie's like, "Well, I don't know your aunt." And she's like, "No, it's okay. Yeah, follow me." And so they follow her to her aunt's place, and they get in there, and there's people. They're hanging out. There's adults. They're up. They're hanging out. So the kids go in the kitchen, and they're getting ready to get some cake, and they cut these big pieces of cake. And then all of a sudden, Eddie's like, "Hey, everybody's getting pinched in here." Like the cops.
There's like a raid.
Yeah, the cops showed up. They were starting to arrest people. So Eddie decides we got to get out of here. So him and Sally, and Tommy proceed to climb out the window where the kitchen is, and they also, before they climb out the window, they're trying to get the cake to bring with them. So there's a moment where they're struggling to... Eddie's struggling to pick the cake up on the plate and also pull it through the window as he's climbing out the window.
And it was a huge cake.
Yeah.
It was an unusually large cake.
It was a pretty I mean, the aunt was serving them up like absurdly large slices to begin. Well, because the cake was so
But he's got
large.
like a third of the cake.
No, I think he took she tried to like manhandle 2/3 of this enormous cake, and like he like sort of kind of like fell on the table and the window. So no, it's great. It's a great moment,
especially because Eddie's big enough to be a jockey, so the cake was like larger than him,
yeah, right.
which added to the comedy. You know, what I thought you were going to touch on, that was my other funniest part of the movie, is when they actually got to the aunt's house.
Oh.
And, like...
How they're greeted?
Yeah, and especially she greets her niece, and she's just like, oh yeah, and I picked up these two guys on the road, and they're going to stay with you. And it's just like, okay.
And it's like, fantastic.
The more the merrier.
Like I would love for one of my nieces to show up unannounced from across the country with two boys she found on the road and tell me they're all going to live on my floor. Like, they'd be like, oh, yay! So I would not give them cake.
I also always laugh, seen the movie multiple times now, and I always laugh with the line, we got 35 minutes. Like, he looks up, not like somebody else would just say 30 minutes.
Well, but you have to explain what the 35 minutes is. No, you explain. What's the 35 minutes?
Until they're going to bust up their tent city.
Yeah.
They knew that's when the authorities were going to be arriving, so
they got news. They got news that the cops are coming down to kick them out. And they're like, oh, okay, we can do this, guys. We got 35 minutes. Not 30 minutes, not 40 minutes. 35 minutes.
Which is better than 34.
Right.
That was a nice touch.
I love that. You know, there's moments that are a little jarring, but then when you realize what's happening, it kind of makes sense. And one of these moments, I think it's a beautiful moment, is... after Eddie jumps in the trash can when he's running away from the authorities down an alleyway in the city, because
he's panhandling.
He's panhandling, it's chased, so then he has to find a way to escape. Jumps in this trash can, and after he's starting to rise out of it, it's almost like he spikes the camera.
Huh.
And there's a moment where it's like he's looking at the audience, he's looking at us, looking at me, you know, like he's looking at you, and then you realize he's looking at a prosthetic leg that's in the display of a store. I felt like that was such a moment of, like, I'm not sure what's happening, or is this a mistake? But then you realize what he's looking at. So I really appreciated, like, that moment in the movie, and it was another kind of, you know, almost reflective or quiet kind of moment where it slows down a little bit after he's chased, has to leap in the trash can in an alleyway.
I want to mention, something that I think is part of the thesis of this film, and that's kind of like the promotion of this filial piety, selfless kind of dedication, devotion to one's parents.
Yes.
And you see this repeated amongst the kids, which is very, very interesting, and I think unusual, because, and I'm not an expert, obviously, about, you know, the vagrancy lifestyle, or the hoboing that was common, you know, and during the Depression. But the thing I found so fascinating was that the impetus for these kids, and there's a little bit of some social strata difference. Eddie obviously comes from a family that's more well off. He owns his own car. He dresses fairly well, suits and such. His father is a tenured administrator or someone at the cement company. They own their own house. Compared to Tommy, who the implication is that he's struggling. His mother has been out of work already for several months. But the thing that all of the characters is that kind of unites all of them. One of the ways they're all united is they really are really concerned about their parents. But it is something that's like not as common today, where it's like, well, what's your first thought? Who do you think of first? When Eddie comes home, this is epitomized in this scene where Eddie comes home. He spent the night out with Tommy and the girls. They went to that social,
the sophomore frolic,
right? They came back, and so Eddie comes home. He goes to the fridge, and he pulls out the pie, and he cuts himself like a pretty generous portion. And it's late at night, so he's like, it's a midnight snack, midnight meal almost, a pie. And he notices that his parents are still up. They're in like the library, the study or whatever. And they come around to explain that, his dad lost his job, they're going to have to start cutting corners. And he's like sensitive to something's happening right away. And without batting an eye, he's immediately like, oh, no problem. I'll start cutting back and we'll be fine. And then there's the whole save face bit about the new suit, which I love that. Mm-hmm. He says like, oh, it's too bad because we just bought that new suit of mine. And his father's like, well, unfortunately, we're gonna have to return it. We can't keep it. And then he like has this kind of clandestine sort of thing with his mom.
Give her a little wink.
Be like, oh, that's okay. I kind of wanted the brown one anyway, so it's all right. We can send it back. And she's like, oh yeah, good move, kind of, telegraphing that. And then the scene closes. He goes back to the fridge, but rather than take the whole large oversized slice, he just takes a small morsel,
piece of it,
right? So it's interesting in that, like, he's quite sensitive to the way that it's like it's not all about him, it's really about we sink or swim as a community, and also that like I have this dedication to these people that like brought me up, and you see this repeated amongst other little flashes of this amongst the other characters. I think this is an important thing to kind of underscore with this film, the way it promotes this. I don't know if it's characterized as such in many other films from this period. I'd say it's an uncommon.
It's not as emphasized as in this film.
Yeah, I'd say it's uncommon and unusual. Maybe unusual, but certainly uncommon. But it is, it's lovely to see that. It's really like refreshing and kind of emboldening and restorative in some ways about what society can be, as an emblem of hallmark for us.
I could be wrong. I'm just going to kind of like guess here. But, in the 1930s, like America was still a very immigrant heavy country, right? Like most people were showing up first generation. And a lot of those values of taking care of your parents still exist around the world today. Just not in America. Americans are selfish when they make selfish children. And that's what we see today. But that kind of behavior wouldn't be rare, especially if you go to Asia today. Those kids take care of their folks. That they take that really seriously. And in lots of parts of Europe, you take care of your folks still. And back then, I think America was still so new that the values weren't American values. They were the values of the home country. And I think that's why that could still happen in the 1930s and why we wouldn't see it today, because now so many families have been here for generations. They've lost that cultural consciousness that they had from where they come from. It's been forgotten. Now, again, I'm just making assumptions here, but that's my observation.
No, I think you're touching on something. Not to be a pessimist, but I think we have whether it was something that was merely like a loan or a borrowed, kind of social cornerstone. It's definitely not It's definitely not prevalent as much as it is today as it would have been 80 years ago.
These guys, they leave home. They didn't even pack food. Eddie and Tommy. Like, he's like, hey, what do you guys? He's like, I got some sandwiches. He's like, oh, okay. All right, what else do you have, like, for tomorrow or later? Oh, that's all I have. It's sandwiches. So, and even the way they leave, they're like, all right, let's leave in 15 minutes. See ya.
Yeah, right. They had like a 30-second discussion about how they're going to go and find jobs. And then after talking for 30 seconds, agreed to meet in 15 minutes, then they're just going to leave everything. This is like, okay, that escalated quickly.
A part of me wonders how much of that is like, sort of filmic sort of fabrication or
him showing his age. Maybe he's a kid. He's not going to really plan that far ahead. I thought that was the first thing.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I guess that ties into them being wild and boys, But what part of me also wonders if that was just maybe something more also of the period in which it was made. Like that, for sure. If a film of a similar synopsis, of a similar idea, was made today, no way would it be decided that quick. That would be ridiculous, But I wonder if, I don't know. Actually, I'm wondering if, for the time and place that film came out, is that something that someone would be like, oh yeah, I could see that happening, just because maybe there's this notion of life being more tenuous and you must just act quickly.
Yeah.
Rather than dwell. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
But those kind of, just crazy decision making, that is in comedies often.
True. Yes.
Or romantic comedies.
This was far from a comedy.
No, but he brings up an interesting point, because even if it was closer to being the reality, there is something pretty kind of
adventurous,
farcical. I mean, yes, true.
Yeah.
There's a wanderlust element to that, but there's something farcical for sure.
Oh, definitively.
Yeah.
Though I will say two things. Number one, I don't think it was done with the expediency that other decisions were made. We talked about just keeping the story. I don't think it was because of that. It did feel intentional, so it was just like, we got to do this quick. And you kind of talked about the mindfulness that Eddie had. In a lot of ways, we saw him thinking about this moment from the time he made the decision about saying he didn't want the suit.
Yeah, you're right.
And then you saw things were percolating, and he never really stopped thinking. So when Tommy said, I'm thinking about maybe leaving this area and finding a job, it was that's what he needed to hear. It's I've been thinking about a solution. That's the solution. Let's do it. And I think that's why it was so fast, is because we were supposed to infer that he had been thinking about it this whole time. He just needed the opportunity to raise his hand.
Oh yeah.
It's funny too. Eddie says this line. He's like, "What? Why should I stay in school and have a good time while Dad's standing in a bread line?"
Great line.
It's a fantastic line, but it further kind of it further sort of advances this notion that's I need to be thinking out for my folks. I need to be thinking out for their well-being. How can I help them? What's the thing that I can do to pay back, contribute? It's a refreshing sort of world view, honestly.
Truth be told, I could see my kid doing something stupid like this to take care of me.
So it's not unfounded
or too far-fetched.
Right? Yeah, for today's standards.
And I won't go into stories, but when we're done, I'll tell you guys a couple stories.
Okay.
But I think my kid's rare in that. His desire to always look out for his folks. His mom, his stepmom, me, his stepdad. He just looks out for us. I do think it's an unusual thing.
Do you have anything, since you are a father and you were in fatherhood? On that level, was there anything you take away from the movie or that you thought about?
It's an interesting question. This was a time period before there was ratings, right? So it's not like this is PG-13.
It'd probably be a PG-13 if they put it in theaters right now.
You think that this would be PG-13? I guess so.
The murder, the rape.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's kind of heavy stuff. Yeah,
very heavy.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. Yeah.
So I think it'd be PG-13 now, but let's take rating systems out of this. I don't think kids under 13 could even fully appreciate what they're watching or why. I think this is a great movie for teenagers. I do not think teenagers need to run away from home to take care of their families. But the moral lesson of putting your family first and taking care of yourself and being a strong moral character, you know, here's the thing, Eddie, he did break laws. He did break rules, but he had a moral code he lived by. And he lived by, like, he did live by it. He stuck to it. I mean, that was a young man of integrity. And I think, you know, we live in this me-first society that we were just discussing. I think this is a healthy movie for teenagers to watch. I wish all American teenagers would watch this movie, because just to look in the mirror and at themselves, like, wow, I would never do that for my family. Well, why wouldn't you? You know, like, we should all, as humans, want to do anything for our family, whether we're the child or the parent. That it's a natural inclination that's in man. So it'd be something that'd be a nice return to that. So yeah, I mean, if I was a teacher in a school, Jeff, as you were, I mean, if I taught in high school, I would play this for my class. I don't even care what my subject was that I would teach. I'd be like, you guys need to watch this because you're a bunch of little selfish punks. So yeah, I just think there was a great moral lesson here.
I love how thank you. For being a movie from the 1930s, I love how there's not really any cigarette smoking or cigar smoking.
And you know what else isn't featured? Boozing. There's I don't think I saw a moment of alcohol or a character that was inebriated.
It might be implied that at the aunt's house, Sally's, that maybe people were having beverages.
Yep,
but they didn't dwell on it or emphasize it.
Those characters had probably like a couple seconds of screen time
in the background.
Yeah. No, yeah. Good point. Yeah.
I hadn't noticed, but
I hadn't thought of that either. Actually,
only scene I can think of is when they snuck into the dance, and Tommy goes in dressed as a girl because girls get in for free, and he goes in the back room to take off his dress, and there's an old man emptying his pipe. A reference to smoking.
Yeah.
Was the old guy with his pipe. That was it. I can't think of any other scene. No, it might have been there, I didn't notice it, but I can't think of another scene.
In what other ways do you think it's the social commentary part or the like forward-thinking aspects that are worth mentioning? Is there anything else on that level?
For me, I already kind of discussed in the beginning when I talked about the duality of the toxic masculinity versus the emotional man. How Eddie was trying to break out of that mold and be his true self. I think we live in a world now where that's talked about more openly. Thank goodness. That is a way that Americans have changed in a positive way. So I do think it'd be great too to like watch this with your kid and talk about this. And I would ask my son after watching, I really would ask him, like, did you see those jocular moments they had where they thought I have to like do these punches to be a man? Is there anything you feel like we do today that falls under that same umbrella? Like, why do we do that? And maybe we should try to remove them from our behavior. I think that'd be a good discussion as a parent to have. That's something I would ask my son.
There is a sense of deep empathy that I also felt was like, all the characters, they're all human, right? They're all fallible, right? Just like anyone is fallible. But another thing that really struck me was the way in which Eddie is like, really very like, also dedicated to his friend.
Tommy.
In a way.
And Sally.
Both. But it begins with Tommy.
Yeah.
They're like best buds. And, something happens to one, like, he's there to defend him. Whatever. I mean, right from Jump Street. They're at the dance. He can't pay. Tommy can't pay to get in, the 75 cents. I don't even know what that is. I think it's like $20 or something, maybe in today's dollars. He can't pay the $20. He doesn't have it. So they sneak him in, disguised as a girl, and they get in and they're able to hang. And then, like, turns out he doesn't have the ticket, so he's going to get ejected. And Eddie's right there. He's like, what do you mean you're going to throw him out? He's like, no, you're not going to throw him out. He's going to walk out with us. You know, like that's something that like somewhat like a true friend does. You know, that's not like a fly-by-nighter. And you see this kind of behavior, this like warmth of character that's just like repeated throughout the film. And it's one of the reasons why this is like such one of my favorite films, is because you get to really see the way like there's like this deep bond in their relationship, and it's not superficial. You know, there's real pathos there. I feel like maybe we have talked a lot about the plot and like the details, so I don't want to go too much into other things that happen. But there's other moments that are like they shake you. You know, they shake you. They're real. They're visceral. You know, the way in which
I want to say the heavier moments that we mentioned earlier, a lot of that happens off screen.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, in gory detail or graphic detail.
No.
So
which they maybe could have done. I don't know.
They handle it in a certain way. I would say in a more artful, cinematic kind of way. Nuanced.
It's really tasteful the way it's depicted. Yeah.
You know, when you talk about the loyalty and the empathy he had for Tommy, you know, I thought a great moment of that too was his emotional intelligence when Tommy fell later. And someone was going to go help him, and he said, "No, don't help him get up." Which, you know, if you look at it without context, it wasn't very nice, but it was super nice because he had the emotional intelligence to know that it hurts his friend's pride, and to let his friend keep his pride. He may have his physical problems, but he can keep his pride. And I even thought that was a nice little moment of emotional intelligence where he was looking out for his buddy.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
I love how you mentioned integrity earlier. How would you define integrity?
Oh boy.
Because I think people need to hear it. Like, I think it's such a... Maybe it's become ambiguous, maybe, or like misused or underused. I think there's a certain confusion about it, or...
Well, I mean, one could argue that there's confusion of the integrity that Eddie has on the show. You know, like I said, he had his own moral compass. He would do things that were wrong, but he might do it for the right reason. He stole a very expensive prosthetic. He did a crime. He did it so his friend could walk again. He did it for the right reason. One could say thieves have no integrity. One could say that was an act of complete integrity. So, like, this conversation about integrity and moral compasses could spin, you know, all night long. But I think integrity is having a moral compass. It is acting from the heart. It is looking at the bigger picture and not making the selfish choice, but making the right choice. And I think it's acting with a full intention, with your whole soul, to do what is good. You may have to do something questionable, but if the good outweighs the bad in that, there's still a level of integrity in it. And I think that was something that was just displayed over and over with Eddie.
There seems to be almost like this code of the road, you know? This like code of ethics amongst the Wild Boys, where, you know, when one of them is, you know, being pulled away, you know, the whole community rallies and be like, no, he's one of us. There's kind of like a musketeer sort of vibe about it that I really quite appreciated. And that's another thing, you see it repeated throughout the film also. This notion of like the code to you know, protect one another. We're all looking for the same thing. We all stick together. There's almost a kind of like familial kind of construction for lack thereof amongst all of them, because they're all essentially doing the same thing for the same reason. That's the assumption.
Yeah, and you know, there was the aha moment during the movie where Eddie realizes this, and it's when they all got kicked off that train by the Nine Dicks, and there's the older guy who may have been a hobo himself sitting on the side of the road they're talking to. They were in Ohio at the time, and he says to them, "There's like 100 of you, and there's 9 of them. Why don't you kick them off?" and you see Eddie, like, this change of expression on his face, like, why don't we kick them off? And that kind of, from that moment, made Eddie see the strength in numbers And you did see a shift in the movie as a whole after that point. So that was one of those movies again, or moments in the movie again, where today things are over-explained or are so huge. There wasn't this giant over-explanation. Someone pointed something obvious to Eddie out. Eddie was just like, well, crap, I never thought of that. You're right, pal. And he just went nuts with it. And that kind of defined him after that.
In that kind of split-second moment saying, all right, yeah, you're right, let's go defend our
changed
turf.
The movie.
I want to talk about Sally a little bit, because she is, I think, an important character in the film. Even the way they meet Sally on the train is kind of a funny moment. I won't totally spoil it, but for either of you, like, what do you think? I mean, she signifies, or what is her role in the story? Like, what did you kind of learn from her character or take away from the way, her arc in the film?
I mean, like the other characters, she also she's left home. I think she says that there's too many mouths to feed, so me being away is going to be easier. I think there was some implication that maybe her mother has passed away. So you can imagine, like, a lot of kids, maybe they're too young or too young to realize what the stakes are, and so she takes it upon herself again as a girl. No, the others, they're, boys, but she's a girl, and she musters that selflessness to take action. I mean, we could talk about the sort of like the gender bender component where she has to, I don't know if that's a reveal, kind of, yeah. She has to basically, and she's not the only one. There's other girls in the film too that they have to assume the guise of a boy, the expectations, in order to fulfill their goal, to help their families do the same thing. They could take on other jobs, but to be on a freight train, which is illegal to begin with, the expectation is you have to be wild, which is why the title is Wild Boys of the Road, not Wild Kids of the Road. Because there's an association with boys, and they're wild. You're telling me they're wild even more so? So it's like they have to, they really have to conform in that sense to what the expectations are. The illegal expectations.
Yeah. And she tries to help him out, let's go to my aunt's place.
Right. That's, to me, that's like they've already gotten beyond, because that's like superficial.
Yeah.
Right? Although she can't like discard that. She still has to assume the same sort of guise, but they're already at the point where, like, okay, you've sort of you're like one of us now, both in all directions. They all regard one another as equals, which is interesting.
I got you. I think she, especially for that time period, like, talk about a feminist, like, that's mind-blowing. Let's just be real. And I'm not talking about my feelings of women, but I'm talking about women in film. They were counted as, oh, golly, tell me what to think. Tell me what to do.
Objects of desire.
They were helpless. They were helpless and beautiful. That's how women were personified. Sally was physically tough, which we learned in the movie. One could argue tougher than a man. So that was like a trope crusher. Then when they were we already touched on this, when they were going to get busted by the detectives at the train, she's the one that pulled out the solution and fixed the problem. She's the one that said they were her cousins. She's the one that saved them. She was the smart one with the plan that the guys were like almost too stupid to realize were happening, and then they went along with it. She's the one that took them to her aunts to save them. She was in a lot of ways the brains, the thinker, the brave one. It was just like, it was amazing that in this time period that they had a female character that was outside of every trope that a woman was portrayed with in Hollywood. And if you notice, it was other people that tried to define her. but she never really was that way herself. Like at one point, Eddie says to her, "You can wash dishes somewhere," and then the judge later says to her, "And we can get you to be someone's house cleaner." But she wasn't thinking that way. She was like, "I'm going to solve problems. I'm going to fix my family. I'm going to take care of my friends." Like, she was tough and she was independent, and she was the equal to the men in every single way. So I just like talk about a movie that empowered women way before women were being empowered in movies. It was kind of radically ahead of its time.
Well said.
Yeah.
Visuals that you think you'll remember from the movie. I'm going to start by saying what I've written down. Really striking visual stuff. The steam from the train and the smoke from the train. And I think with the movie being in black and white, it kind of really enhances or emphasizes the steam and the smoke. The staging of the train scenes. Hopping on the trains, hopping off the trains, the encounters with the authorities at the fields of the trains, and all of those sequences I think are very impressive on a filmmaking level. Obviously, I think all the kids, it's safe to say, they all did their own stunts.
It's not part of being a kid.
Yeah, right.
So I think
it should be.
Visually, these trains coming in and people are jumping off and then trying to, not get hit by trains as well. I was really, those are quite, like riveting and suspenseful scenes. So was there any visuals from you guys that really stood out, or
the retaking and the egg assault? Wild Boys fend off the railroad dicks, get back on the train, and then the train carriages are filled with like produce
and eggs,
and they're on the top of the carriages as the train is pulling away, and they're just plummeting the cops with eggs, and that to me is a striking visual. In that it's just so unusual and graphically quite engaging, but it's also quite a feat of like staging and to pull that off. So it's like all the mechanical things that need to happen to make an image like that work well is quite impressive for me. I've always been affected by that image. There's something almost like fantastical, but also there's like almost like a journalistic acuity to it in a way that's like quite impressive.
Like a documentary feel or newsreel feel.
It definitely feels almost like it could have been, but like it's so like surreal in a way because like that's so unusual, so like beyond usual that you're like, how could this be a real thing? But you know what? I bet there probably was a situation like that either was written about or someone witnessed. So to create it for this feature, I thought was like, just beautiful, elegant, surprising, striking. You never see anything like that in a film today, I feel.
One thing that I thought was pretty cool, given that this was in the 30s, in the egg scene, they throw an egg at a police officer's face. And then they cut to the police officer's perspective, and it was egg on the glass, or egg on the camera, or a sheet of glass in front of the camera. And again, I thought that was really progressive for when it was made. The whole look at the POV, look at what it's like trying to look through this egg mess. Hollywood still tries to capture POV shots to denote a situation. That was progressive and cool and unexpected, and it put a smile on my face. So huge props to those directors in the 1930s. They were on it, especially for a B film. Goodness.
Yeah. I think this guy William Wellman was really one of the best, directors, especially of American directors, and that those decades that he made films, and you will see his concern for people, struggling economically in other films. This isn't the only time he ever, had such characters. So I think that's another reason to check out his movies. And it's almost like William Wellman's version of maybe America. Maybe that's a way to kind of look at, when you watch his movies, the things that he's putting in the forefront, and it's, the priorities as like an artist kind of stuff that he wanted to explore. Even working in the studio of, the Hollywood machine, it's almost a miracle or amazing he was able to still make such powerful art and really kind of maybe transcend just like what was just going to be expected or what was the like standard at the time. I feel like with this movie in particular, he was trying to push the boundaries. And if you get a chance to read Wild Bill Wellman, the book, which was written by his son, it's a biography about William Wellman, the director of Wild Boys of the Road. You get all these stories, and when they talk about Wild Boys of the Road, I won't say really what was different, but the original ending of the movie was not what we saw today. Wellman wanted a different ending, and they had to film a different ending. So that's shared in the book. Wellman was very excited about the movie to the point where he kind of said to himself, I'm going to kind of ignore the studio and just try to get away with as much as I can to make the movie the way I want to make it. And creatively, the decisions that I want to try to implement and see through, like, I'm just going to try to do my best as a creative artist, as a director. Is there anything else before we stop and let you guys get hydrated and get some fresh air, or go for a walk or get on with your lives? Is there anything else you want to mention? Or
I will say movies like Stand By Me and The Outsiders, they wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for movies like this. Yeah. And those are movies that most of you listening probably did see. And if you've seen those movies, you'll probably want to check this out, especially if you like them. And, as a dad, which I think I'm the only dad in the room, especially, again, I mentioned earlier, if you have teenagers, get them to watch this. I'm going to play it for my son. I do think there's moral lessons here that are invaluable that we don't get in movies today. So that's my sign-off, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's time for the outro.